are obviously running under some rather chaotic delays. I don't know how many of you went to lunch or didn't go to lunch, but I thought to give some of the people a little more time, we would do things upside down and start by taking a couple of questions from you in the audience about customer discovery, product market fit, and then 5 or 10 minutes from now, we'll walk through the presentation, which talks about it in a little more detail. So we have some microphones. If anybody's got questions about customer discovery, lean startup, life on the planet, I do my best to try and answer those.
Hello. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you. I was just speaking to my friend here who's also an aspirational engineer, entrepreneur, and we're debating, should you develop a product by going into the market, taking it to the market and testing it to get feedback and then iterate? Or should you do interviews first, learn about the customer problem, then build a solution, then present it, and then iterate on that?
Okay, well, it's a very complicated question, and there are a lot of variables. But the way I encourage people to think about beginning or launching a startup is very much the same. Not that I'm good at advice for the love advice, but it's very similar to falling in love. You don't want to marry the first man or woman you meet. You want to spend some time with him or her in a lot of different situations before you commit to a bond that hopefully will last you the rest of your life. Similarly, a startup is a commitment that, as you'll see in one of the slides, is a guaranteed minimum of 20,000 hours of your life. That's 5 years, 80 hours a week, maybe a holiday for Kwanzaa or Christmas, or maybe your spouse's birthday if she's still around, because you're never home, you're always working. And it's important to take time, serious time, sometimes a year or more, to really get a feel for the market you're going to enter, what the opportunities are like, whether this is exciting enough for you to drive you to relentless, no weekends, very few evenings off. Your dog forgets who you are when you come home and barks at the stranger in the house. And so the more you can do in front of pushing the actual button of renting the office or opening the doors or hiring people, the more you can do to have confidence in the size of the opportunity and in the uniqueness of what you're doing to really capitalize on that opportunity, the more you have a chance to really improve your chances for success. And I was speaking to one young lady a little while ago. What do I do? Do I launch it and then figure out who's going to work with me? I'm still in school. Do I launch it while I'm in school? And as you'll hear me say again and again, there is no part-time life for startup founders. This is every ounce of energy you can muster, every day you can do it. And so you want to be sure that you've made as much preparation as you possibly can before you launch, both in terms of understanding the market and your fit in that market, and also understanding your commitment, your excitement about the market. I began my career, my very short professional career, as a journalist, and at the age of 22, I had a spectacular job. The only problem was I couldn't see myself doing it for the next 40 years of my life. So to the despair of my working class parents, I quit to start a company, partly because I had already figured out what it was going to do. I already had lined up a couple of clients, and I was willing to go from a huge salary to a salary of rapidly approaching zero, because I wanted to be my own boss, have my own business, and because I had an idea of what I was going to build, which was basically a publicity, public relations operation. And 6 or 9 months, because I came from the journalism field, and typically journalists who want to move on to something with bigger opportunities, move to public relations. Problem is, about 6 months into it, I really honestly realized that I didn't enjoy calling editors and begging them to write stories about my clients. I didn't enjoy many of the components that drive public relations success. So I had 2 options. 1, shut the doors, or 2, pivot and get it to a business that I enjoyed more. So what did I enjoy? I enjoyed figuring out how to make the business work. I enjoyed the selling. I enjoyed creating the ideas. And I shifted my hiring strategy to hire people who enjoyed talking to editors, who enjoyed sort of promoting and selling things, so they could do the parts I didn't like, and I could focus on the things I enjoyed that would drive growth of the business. It was a difficult change and one you'd like to avoid, and so the more homework you can do in advance, the better off you are. The classic example of this is American entrepreneur, probably older, actually definitely older than me, named Jim McCann, who was a job counselor in a men's homeless shelter and decided he needed to make more money to support his family, wanted to have his own business, and he said, gee, I love flowers. I love arranging them. I love smelling them. I love the smile you get when you give somebody flowers. And the flower shop in my town is for sale. So most of us, right, entrepreneurs, okay, let me go make the deal, buy it, fix it, make it grow. He did a brilliant thing first, which is he went to a neighboring town and said to the owner of a flower shop, I'd like to work here for free for a couple of weeks to see what it's like to come and be around these smells every day. It's great to smell, when somebody hands you the bouquet, when it's sitting on your dining table or whatever, but being around it, doing what is my life going to be like once I sign the check, mortgage my house to go into that particular business. And the more you can do to sort of pre-test or explore the opportunity before you take the plunge, the better off you are. So, what else? We now have no other questions. There's one over there. Do we have a microphone? Okay. Oh, here he comes.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name's Tabatso, and I've got a quick question. Once you started up your business, and it's doing pretty well, how do you then, when you see the growth potential in the business, find the right partners and suppliers to help you accelerate the startup? Because I think it's the trust element of not knowing people who are just as invested in the idea to actually support it, not just screw you over, take your money and not deliver on their side.
Sure. Well, it's again a very important yet complicated question, and I think the way I encourage you to think about it is the same way I encourage you to think about your product or service itself. It's all about creating a test laboratory. Test and iterate. So if you see someone who could be a fabulous delivery partner, give him or her a few orders, see how it goes. Give them a 2 or 3 month contract. See how it goes. Do they do business the way you would hope they would? Are they a responsible partner, provider, whatever? And let the relationship expand or contract based on your enthusiasm for their performance. And you can apply that sort of thinking to channel partners, to distribution partners, to manufacturing or reseller partners, and particularly to employees. In my PR business, it started to grow fast, And the hardest thing to do was to find talented, ambitious people who didn't know, that there was a quitting time at work, and who, sort of approached the business with the same sort of energy and passion that I did. And so basically everybody who came into the company came in, this was in the early 1970s, for the grand salary of $200 a week, which was about what a sort of mid or entry-level journalist was being paid at the time. And for that $200, you were given the keys to a project or two, an account or two, or whatever. And it created a wonderful meritocracy in the company, where the people who did the best job, took on the most work, made the clients the happiest, got to move up quickly, not only in title and responsibility, but in salary, because if they had proven themselves in my shop, which had a pretty good reputation, I then had to quickly begin to compete with them in the open market, because they could get a job anyplace else in New York City. And so some of those people went on. In fact, when we sold the company some years later, one of the partners, who began at $200 a week, owned about 30% of the company when we sold it, and another owned 5 or 6, and several others owned 2 or 3 or 4, all starting at that same show me what you can do level. This is most important when you're hiring salespeople, because nobody can BS or con or schmooze or charm or overstate like a really good salesperson. And you get to visit that salesperson in a 1-hour interview or 45-minute interview, and you are really out of control of that interview, although you can ask some clever questions and things like that. So how do you expand your knowledge of a sales candidate before you push the button and sign a contract and, an employment contract, and worst of all, start introducing them to customers and prospects? So one technique is to, give them a presentation on the company and give them 45 minutes in another room to sort of organize their own presentation back to you. Another is to have them go and talk to other members of your leadership team about how they would approach the sales process, or give them homework and ask them to come back in a week. But test along the way before you, in your hurry to get a salesperson on the street, or an account executive in your company, or whatever the position might be, find some ways, invent some mechanisms to test them sort of before you commit. Let's take one more, and then I think we probably ought to start showing some slides. We've got one down in front. Give our guys with the microphone some exercise, but I don't even see them. So I will answer your question later for a cocktail, okay? Well, having absolutely no control of what's going on, I have no knowledge of when we're going to end, but my guess is the schedule has moved back an hour, and there are still 1,000 hungry attendees downstairs. So for those of you who haven't eaten, I hear there's some great places right across the street at the mall. But what I want to talk about, many of you heard Dan Eisenberg talk about scaling up, and scaling up is vitally important to your long-term success, because if you're going to make a startup commitment, you want to get to the point where there's an opportunity to truly expand it, grow it into something that's sustainable. And getting there requires an awful lot of thought and work, in advance of that. And so what I want to try to do is talk to you a little bit about some of the 118,000 words in the Startup Owner's Manual. And from that, you'll be happy to know I've extracted 3 things only that I want to talk about today. First, briefly about me. Age 22, I started my first business. Over 30 years, 7 startups, 2 by any reasonable definition, home run successes, exits in the many millions of dollars, 2 very modest successes, and 3 where I learned everything I know about startups, where I invested my own money, a year or more of my own time and energy and perspiration, and at the end, all I had was what was clear evidence of failure. And so I took all that sweat and work and money, rolled it in a ball, dropped it into the toilet, and flushed that thing down. And that is when you stop and think about how do you build a startup the right way. And our joke, Steve Blank's and my joke about the Startup Owner's Manual, is that between the covers are 500 stupid startup mistakes. And of those 500, we've each made about half of them personally, and 50 or so that we each made separately in our own various startups. And believe me, they are more fun to read about than they are to actually commit. So I went on from there in about year 2000 to make about 27 seed or angel investments, 7 IPOs, 6 more direct to the toilet, and every lesson you can imagine in between. And the problem with an IPO is you don't learn anything. You learn how to spend money, you learn how to buy a yacht, but you don't really learn anything about building a startup because you're too busy telling yourself how brilliant you are, how strategic, how timely, and so forth. Now, why does this math matter? This is why. According to a recent study, every day of the year, there are 137,000 startups founded somewhere in the world. This can be a young man or woman getting a taxi license or a taco truck or whatever, or it can be the next Google, Facebook, or Snapchat. Think about how many that is. And think about how many of those 137,000 are remembered a year or 2 or 3 years later. One venture capitalist suggests that 12 have a sustainable life, something truly memorable, like a Facebook or a Google or a social venture or something not necessarily huge, but important and making a difference. Another estimate is that 2% of them survive. And if you're going to do all the hardest work in the first few years of giving birth to that startup, don't you want to be one of those survivors? 20,000 hours, as I said. Use those hours the right way to make sure that whatever you're building will really matter. And all of this building, and really the sort of kernel of wisdom that permeates Steve Blank's first book, The 4 Steps to the Epiphany, our book together, The Startup Owner's Manual, is that nothing really matters but your customers and their feedback and their attitude about what you're doing and so forth. And that's where the heart of these 3 pillars are, right? Technology is so powerful and so ubiquitous today that we can build just about anything. I think it was last week, Elon Musk sold the first 2 tickets to the moon, which will be delivered, I believe, in 2019. Who would have even dreamed of that a few years ago? So if you can build that, you can certainly build a more earthbound or pedestrian sort of startup. And so if you don't find your way to these 3 pillars, you fundamentally have almost a 0% chance of building a great sustainable business, right? And so what is a great sustainable business? It's repeatable. I sold 32 this week, I sold 34 next week, I sold 29 the week after, but it happens again and again. It doesn't happen just in that initial burst of enthusiasm when we've launched the company or the product. It's scalable. If it works in Johannesburg, it works in Pretoria, it works in other countries throughout Africa. If it's really scalable, it works throughout the world. And sooner or later, usually later, it's profitable. It can be profitable in the form of doing good things for the world, which in my opinion is a sort of higher calling than trying to buy your next vacation home, yacht, or whatever. It can be for profit, obviously, which most of us are here to think about today, but it's got to be fun. There are so many dark days in your life and a startup. I mean, I spent 5 months in a hospital bed running my business while they were taking me around for tests and stuff like that. And the business struggled, and it wasn't any fun either doing the work or doing the tests in the hospital. It was a pretty ugly time. But what kept me going was that I had 7 years invested in this business. I had built a great reputation, a great team of people, and a business that wasn't, overwhelmingly profitable, was clearly on the road to repeatable, scalable success. And on those dark days, and all of you will have them, you've got to make sure that you love what you're doing. Thus, the falling in love sort of metaphor of don't jump at the first idea, don't jump at the first founding, co-founder, partner. Take your time. Pick your startup as carefully as you would pick your mate, because you're going to probably, for at least the first few years, spend much more time with the startup than the mate, and you're going to need to deal with that with him or her along the way. So what are the 3 pillars that get you there? First, you must focus on, am I solving a serious, nasty, ugly, painful, expensive problem, right? Is this something that keeps people up at night, that has their boss thundering down the hall yelling at them about it? If you're not solving a problem, a serious problem that people have often, that costs them time, costs them money, costs them customers, or filling an urgent need, a need that they have frequently, just more typical of consumer products, whereas problem solving is much more often found in the business-to-business startup world. If you're not doing that, you haven't found a market opportunity, right? If nobody cares about the problem your company is solving, where is the reward going to come from in solving the problem at the end of the day, right? So, what's a market opportunity? I can see my way to a relentless, endless stream of customers, either in my town, my state, my country, my region, or my internet, right? I'm solving a problem that they have told me they need to solve. And I've learned along the way that I've developed a clever, innovative, disruptive solution to that problem, right? Customer discovery gets you there, right? Now, a couple of quick rules about customer discovery. Our opinions don't matter. We're going to get the product for free, right? So it's talking not to distributors, not to retailers, but to the person who is going to put the deodorant under their arms or put the chemicals on their farm, the end user who is going to create the demand that pulls your product through distribution. And you've got to dedicate yourself, even before you've started the company, to address the severity of the problem with your customers. And the only way to do that is to get out and talk to them face to face. Market surveys don't really help. You get lots of 2s and 3s and 4s and very few comments. Hiring McKinsey for $150,000 a month doesn't help, because they want to get to the next project. They want to focus on the big ideas, not the smaller opportunities or the sort of edges of the opportunity that might be stronger than the one you're focused on. So you, the entrepreneur, the founder, have to get out, get face to face, and understand what's in the customer's heart. Are they being polite with you, or are they jumping out of their seat saying, "You mean there are companies that can solve that for me?" One quick story. Launching an industrial battery for a startup inside of General Electric. We did intensive problem discovery, interviews all over the world. We flew people all around talking to the people we thought might find this new innovative battery interesting. One of its features was that it performed as well in freezing cold temperatures or 100-degree, Saharan temperatures as it did in your living room. So one of the places we visited was a Safeway frozen food warehouse outside of Chicago. 8 football fields, 20 degrees below zero, storing, frozen pizza, ice cream, you name it, for all the Safeway stores in the Midwest. And so Rick, the guy who went out and did that customer discovery interview, did it the right way. He didn't sit in the operations manager's office. He put on fur boots and a fur coat, thick mittens and a Cossack hat, and spent the day walking around these football fields full of frozen pizza and frozen peas, frozen dinners, and you name it, to see what a day in the life of this guy was like. And they're walking around, oh, those are the expensive frozen pizzas. We keep them closer to the vents. Those are the cheap ones. These are the ones that go out every day. They're close to the aisle, so we can move them quickly. And they're walking and talking, and, what are your priorities? What are your problems? The guy said, well, my problems are that people don't show up for work, or we have power failures, et cetera, et cetera. But along the way, Rick noticed that all of the forklift trucks were headed in that direction. They had 45 forklift trucks driven by union drivers operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Lots of overtime, tremendous expense to the warehouse. And they're all going over there. It was not the ATM or the check cashing station. It turned out it was the battery department. The batteries on the forklift trucks only lasted 45 minutes. So every 45 minutes, this union driver making $60,000 or $70,000 a year had to stop what he was doing, drive over there, and spend 20 minutes getting there, unhooking the batteries, putting them in the charger, putting new chargers on, putting new batteries on his forklift, and getting back to work. So, as Rick asked the guy, have you ever calculated how much that downtime costs you 24 hours a day? He said, no, I haven't. It's sort of in the budget, and we live with it. Rick went back and did some homework, figured out the salary, figured out the waste, and came back with a presentation that said, our batteries will save you $1.6 million a year in payroll costs, which makes our battery actually less expensive than the standard cheap car batteries that you're using now, and our batteries are infinitely more expensive than those. Got the order, found an important customer segment, and have sold lots of batteries to frozen warehouses and to telecoms operating cell phone towers in Alaska and the South Pole and stuff like that. If Rick had been sitting in his office reading reports, he never would have gotten that insight. If he had had a phone conversation with that customer, the likelihood of seeing all the drivers going to the same place might never have come up. The other part of problem discovery that's critical is think of your own workday. How much time do you have to pay attention to how many issues? Right? Most of us can handle 3 or 4 or 5 crises at a time. We're entrepreneurs. Corporate people can probably handle 2 or 3. But if the problem you're solving isn't on the customer's list of his or her top 5 problems to solve, you are never going to get that order. If you're not high in their hierarchy of needs, or saving them millions of dollars like Rick did, or saving them hours of time, or improving their competitive situation, if you're not able to do something like that, you're not even going to get your product in the consideration set. So what do you do, right? In this first, there are three phases, three distinct phases to customer discovery. The first is problem discovery, which I want to talk about just a little bit more. The second, which I'm going to skip over today because it's somewhat obvious if you do it right, is competitive analysis. Because if you have found a thorny, nasty problem, odds are pretty good you're not the only one who's found it. So you better go out and see what the other solutions are, how they're doing, how they propose to solve the problem, how are you going to stand out from them in a Google search, at a trade show, in a sales presentation, in a response to RFPs. Understand where you fit in the universe. And then third is understand what people think of your product. But the first time you go out, you shouldn't even really have a product. You might have members of your team working on developing it, speccing it, or even building the first prototypes, tools, or whatever, but go out only to talk about the problem, right? Second, don't lead the jury, right? This is a, sort of cornball, TV law show phrase. Don't say to the guy in the warehouse, do you have a problem with the life of your batteries? Don't give him the answer you want. So there's two ways to do that. Sir, tell me about your 3 biggest problems. Or, here are the 5 biggest problems we've heard of. Don't tell them which one you're planning to solve. Put them in order of how they impact your business. And if you come out on as 5 out of 5, you have a lot to learn about why he or she doesn't think it's important. If you're number 1, understand more about why it's such a priority and what if they tried to solve before that. So ask the customer to prioritize their problems in your space, right? If you've got accounting software, there could be sort of problems might include month-end closing or accounts payable or accounts receivable or collecting, payments from customers. And if you've got a payment solution, let the customer tell you that the one thing my boss asks me about every morning at the coffee pot is how much did you collect yesterday? Or the accounting term, ADO, average days outstanding. If you are the collection manager at even a mid-sized company, the measure of your success is, are your customers paying in an average of 45 days, 35 days, 20 days? And are you moving it in the right direction by doing a thorough job? And if your solution helps that accounts receivable person, you started to get a grip on a market opportunity, right? So a quick example, right? I want to bring clean water to our town, right? I didn't tell them how I'm going to do it or what my system is or what my company or product is, right? You never would ask, would you like to have clean water in your town, right? Tell me the 5 biggest problems facing your town. Let them put them in order, in priority order. And if they make water a low priority, tell me why water isn't so important. Don't people need it to bathe and drink and so forth? And if they made fire safety number 1, why is fire safety number 1, right? To understand the differences and to understand where you fit in the universe. If your problem turns out not to be a priority, it doesn't mean your solution is a bad idea. So you have to come back. First, we had to pick a number. We recommend that you have this conversation 20 times, okay? It's a lot of commitment, it's a lot of time, but it's nothing compared to the 20,000 hours you're going to spend in the next 4 or 5 years working on your startup. Think of it as buying an insurance policy that you're solving a problem that people really care about. But if you get or less than top 5 enthusiastic feedback, you may have done something wrong and you may need to do it all over again, right? Did you frame the problem in the right context? Did you talk to the people whose job it is to solve or worry about this problem? Or did you talk to the executive down the hall because he was a friend of your cousin's in the right industry? So think back to where you've been and the source of your feedback. And is the problem that you're going to try to solve visualized as sort of unsolvable by the people you're talking to? We have a product that's going to promote world peace. Well, good luck with that, especially with our new president with his finger near the button. Or did you do discovery about water supply just after a monsoon? Were there exogenous factors that impacted the answers you got? So you need to take apart the answers you got to validate them and make sure that if you got positive answers, you got them for the right reasons. And if you if you didn't do as well, how do you go back and take another bite at this apple and try to, ask the questions again? If it's not a problem, maybe you need to sort of reframe either the problem you're solving or the way you explain it to people. Maybe you need to refocus on a different audience. Maybe the accounts receivable clerk doesn't really care that much about new solutions to her problem, but the CFO cares a lot because it means more money in the bank more quickly and less borrowing to cover the cost of operations. So maybe you need to refocus and talk to CFOs instead of managers or clerks. And when you've rethought the way you're doing your problem discovery, you go out and you do it again using the new guidelines you've developed. And if you don't get a good answer there, you try again. And as long as you are still committed to your product as a solution to an important problem for some group of people, you may have to do this 2 or 3 or 4 times. And it's hard, it's particularly hard the second or third time. But you've got to make sure that you understand the problem you're solving or the need you're filling in the geography where you're starting to make sure that there will be a receptive audience for whatever it is you're going to sell. Sounds easy, right? After that, go on to competitive analysis because, as I said earlier, if you have found that really thorny problem, others have found it too. Now, there are some exceptions to this. Does anybody think that it was a frequent, urgent need to post pictures of your last night in the saloon with your friends or your dogs or your grandchildren or stupid comments or sayings and share them with everybody you've ever known? Enter Facebook, certainly one of the great successes of the last decade. And Facebook sort of stumbled into it by expanding from its founding university, Harvard, where you had to have an EDU address to join Facebook, to other universities where people were showing pictures of their beer pong games and their dogs and their girlfriends and their bike rides. And then they made one simple change to Facebook, and they no longer required the .edu to get a Facebook account. So anybody in any country in the world can do it. Enter, one of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, and also one of the world's youngest gazillionaires, right? And they figured out, as you need to think about in your competitive analysis, how are we going to stand out from the 6 or 8 competitors that are there already and the others we're likely to attract? It is far more difficult to be the only solution in a category or to be the only solution to a problem, because now you have the job all to yourself of explaining the problem, of explaining why the problem is damaging to your customer's business or personal life in some important way, and why you happen to be the only solution on earth, to that problem. For a chemical company, Monsanto, making Avidex BW, a weed control chemical used all over the world in wheat, sometimes known as Fargo. We spent years doing a marketing crusade about how much the wild oat, which is a weed, growing in a wheat crop, cut productivity, damaged the next season's crop productivity from the land. And by the way, the most commonly used solution is Fargo or Avidex BW. In other words, create awareness for the problem and the pain that the problem causes, and sell your solution into that awareness. And if you can't find the way to stand out in that crowd of competitors, you have an almost insurmountable challenge, because at first it'll feel just fine. But once you start to move your marketing to scale, you're going to see that your customer acquisition cost is totally out of line and is not decreasing as you get better at customer acquisition. It will make it almost impossible for you to get investors. You will run out of cash at an alarming rate, and you may have had the greatest product in the world, but you haven't figured out what, a marketing MBA course will teach you is product positioning, right? There are 14 ways to kill wild oats in wheat. Why is this one the best? What does it do differently? What, minimal harm does it do to the crop or the soil and so forth? What are the key elements of your value proposition that differentiate you from the rest of the market? And spend time working on your value proposition, because that's going to get you to pillar number 2, product market fit, right? Customer discovery can guide you all the way to this. But the way to think of it is, on day 1, you start your business. And the sort of guiding rule born in Silicon Valley is that a startup has to have 2 founders, relatively equal in weight, although with me it's hard to find one that's that equal. And one is the hacker. One is the coder, the engineer, the architect, the person who is actually in charge of making the product. So that's the hacker. Over here you have the hustler, the salesperson, the marketing person, the social media person, the person who loves nothing more than going out to Starbucks and interviewing 22 housewives about how they choose their diapers for the baby in the stroller in front of them. Because he loves talking to people, he loves learning, he loves sort of having disruptive thoughts about hopefully more interesting subjects for most of us than diapers. And so on day 1, right, the hacker is starting the first lines of code, the first sketches, the first manufacturing drawings, the first service plans, and the hustler is starting to talk about the problem. One's in the office, one's out. And as the 2 are going through their work week, every couple of days or once a week, they get together. And the hacker says, well, I've just built this feature. And he goes, well, don't build any more in that feature set, because all I'm hearing is nobody cares about that, everybody cares about this. So they shift the build plan for the software or the hardware, and the hacker keeps working, and the hustler goes out and learns more, and next week they have more feedback. And it's a continuous process that fundamentally never ends until you sell your startup for a lot of money, or you close the doors and go on to startup number 2 or number 7. And so product market fit is when you match who you think your customer is with why you believe they should give you money instead of any of your other 7 or 8 competitors. It's a match that doesn't ever happen all the time. I have seen it happen all the time once in Bogota, Colombia, where a small startup called Logistica was going to provide warehouse automation to domestic warehouses. In other words, robots and pulleys and computers that could pick and pack and put a label on an order, put the order in the box, and put it out the door with virtually no human intervention. Very common in large-scale multinational warehouses, but not very common in sort of smaller, more independent businesses. And so, based on the instructions you just heard, they went out to have 20 problem discovery calls, where they talked not to the, Pepsi-Cola of Colombia, because Pepsi-Cola of Colombia gets its warehouse construction instructions from PepsiCo headquarters in Purchase, New York. They went to companies in Colombia with at least 50, if not 100 products, with at least 100 orders a week, where they felt they could get benefit from warehouse automation. And they called me about 4 days after I left town, and they started on their interviews, and they said, "Bob, what do we do? We've had 4 of these interviews. Nobody wants to talk about the problem." I said, "Well, that's strange. What do they want to talk about?" Well, each of them said, "Look, we know your parent company. For those of you from Colombia, Carvajal, one of the pride and joy companies, multi-billion-dollar company in Colombia. We know your company, so we know you're not going to rob us. We know you're going to be honest, responsible people. This is a problem we've been suffering with for years. We couldn't find a trusted source to fix it. So we don't want to talk about it anymore. Go back to your office, draw up a contract, and let's get to work." 4 times in a row. It is like the dream state for an entrepreneur. And that business, I think, last year did about $17 million, very profitable because they're selling a lot of soft services like engineering and software and so forth. So you have to find that match. When you don't, you have to think further about who is actually the buyer. Not necessarily the user, because the user may have to go up 3 levels in a company to find the person who will sign the purchase order or sign your check. Do they feel that the value proposition is going to resonate with everybody, that you're talking to? Now, it doesn't have to be everybody. It has to be a predictable, profitable match rate. Right? You show your idea to 20 people, right? You already know you're solving a problem that's a serious problem in their industry or their geography or whatever. You show it to 20. The likelihood of getting 20 enthusiastic responses, I sort of define an enthusiastic response as, "Can I buy it now? I know it's a buggy prototype, but I need it now." That's the height of enthusiasm. And you need to get close to that. If you're accepting, "Gee, that's very interesting, come see me when you're ready and I'll think about it," I don't put that in the kind of enthusiasm I personally would want to bet 20,000 hours of my life on. So the match rate, if you're selling a new type of Learjet, right, $20 million a piece, if you get 1 out of 100, you are golden. You are on the way to, phenomenal riches, because you can afford to do 1,000 sales outreaches to sell one $30 million product. But if your product is a smartphone app that you're going to sell for $3 or $5 or $7, and remember, you're going to give 30% of that money right off the top to Apple or Google just for putting your app on their shelf, right? What percentage does your match rate need to be, particularly if you're going to spend any money at all on marketing, on something like AdWords, where a click on an AdWord is still miles from a sale. So how many AdWord clicks can you afford to sell that app that make gross margin to you, gross dollars to you, is $4 or $5 or $7. And so to get to the match rate, you've got to talk to a lot of people. and see, is there any common thread among the people who are particularly enthusiastic? Are there any people I don't need to talk to? Again, back in Bogota, we had a product we thought was brilliant for bodegas. There are 85,000 bodegas in Colombia. 3/4 of them are tiny one-man or woman operations where the financial system is the owner's pocket, and they can figure out the profitability on Friday night by seeing how many pesos are left after they've paid the employees and paid the vendors. And nobody wanted the brilliant software solution we had, except about 10% of the bodegas that were larger, better stocked, had 2 cash registers with 2 employees running the cash registers. This is how tightly we defined the customer segment, right? And so it made our sales effort incredibly more efficient, because you didn't have to walk in to figure out, is that one in my target audience or not? The closer you can get to this kind of product market fit, the better your chances of an efficient marketing engine, of the ability to make your business not just scalable, but repeatable, and do the same thing in other markets, because you know what the customer looks like, right? If you knew that your only customers were going to be tall, old, gray-haired guys with mustaches, you could pick them out much more easily at an airport than if you knew they were all, sort of older executives or whatever you want to call me, right? How do you get to the point where you can identify who your target customer is? Again, somewhere along the rate of this dance, hopefully giving you plenty of time to adjust the product if it's more appealing to certain customer segment that's much more interested, right? And eventually, right, the match rate is what drives your profitability. It's the efficiency of your marketing, the cost effectiveness really more than efficiency, the ability to go from one geography to the next without sort of starting over, and it makes it more repeatable. You always want to test it twice. So if you go out and you talk to 20 people, and 4 of the 20 are buy it now, rabidly enthusiastic, maybe you were having a good day, or maybe this was new to you and it was kind of fun, or maybe you and your co-founder were having a race to see who could get more enthusiasts, so you were both maybe rounding up a little bit. So once you come back and you say, okay, it's 4 out of 20, and yes, we can make money making 20 presentations to get 4 sales, which lots of you can do. Then just for insurance sake, go out and do 10 more and make sure you got 20% again, that it wasn't a particularly good day, there wasn't a monsoon and you're in the umbrella business. Make sure that it's a valid statistic, because what comes next is spending every dollar you can raise or borrow or what, I don't want to say steal, every dollar you can get your hands on to start to manufacture this product as you get to the end of the customer development cycle, and use every dollar you can to get customers' attention. If you don't get an acceptable match rate, don't jump off the roof. Plus, most startups are in sort of smaller buildings, so you'll just hurt yourself. It won't, really end the exercise. Think about, did certain benefits that you weren't promoting seem more important to all the people, to some of the people? Should you reorder basically the presentation or rebuild the product to do more in one area and less in another? Should you make less of a product? Did you find that it was confusing because it did so much that the customers couldn't figure out what they would use it for? Do I need to really buy the whole thing because I really want this part? So sometimes making the product or service smaller or making it bigger can change the dimension of the customer response, as can talking to different customer segments. Sometimes you'll find that there just aren't enough customers in your geography. So try to do some tests of AdWords in neighboring or adjacent markets, or of email blasts or social media blasts to see if, yes, I'm going to have a lower customer density, but I'm going to have it across a much larger geography, and I have found a way to get them interested, without showing up at their company. One of my more successful early stage investments was a company that was selling SaaS network security software, and they were selling it with a staff of 5 who would rent cars, fly to Chicago, spend 3 days driving around Illinois, making face-to-face presentations. And as that was happening, in the outside world, the price of SaaS software, particularly for security, was dropping at a steady rate. And I sort of took the CEO out for a long drunken dinner and convinced him that we are selling entirely the wrong way. If we are going to build a cost-effective marketing engine, we have to do this with PR, with email blasts, with outbound and inbound telemarketing. And that company grew to about 9,000 customers when we sold it some years ago for about $175 million. Changing the marketing reach of the company by making the marketing more efficient. But if you don't find this product market fit, you owe it to yourself, to your co-founders, to your employees and your investors to pause and to go back and sort of rethink it, because you're launching into dark space without product market fit, without having a standard that, well, every time we make 10 sales calls, we ought to pretty quickly have 2 contracts. Or every time we send out 1,000 emails, we ought to generate 25 phone calls, and 5 of those ought to become customers. You need to have those baseline metrics. More and more investors, particularly Series A investors, won't even give you a check. Many of them won't even consider you until you can show them a pachinko machine of a business, right? The Japanese pinball machine, you drop a quarter in the tower, you drop a couple of yen in the top, little balls bounce around, things light up, and so on, and then money either drops out of the bottom or it doesn't. What does a Series A investor want to see? They want to see a pachinko machine built by an entrepreneur. Put an investor's dollar in the top, it bounces around, lights flash, noises, smoke, whistles, whatever, and at least $1.10, preferably $1.20 or $2, come out of the bottom. Not every time, but most of the time. And if your startup has a team of pachinko repairmen and engineers on staff to continue to tweak and improve the machine, they're going to like it even better. In other words, we're now acquiring customers at a 30% cost of sales, but we have done some tests that show us we can get this down to 18 or 16 or even better. And let's just for fun look at what next year would look like if we went from 30 to 25 to 20. And you will literally see investors' eyes light up when you've shown them that you understand the heart of product market fit, and that whatever your fit is today, you're going to be dedicated to testing it and improving it for the entire life of your company and their investment, right? A quick example of where this worked, Groupon, right? Groupon wasn't born as Groupon, it was born as a company called ThePoint.com in the Loop in central Chicago. Bunch of bright young people got together thinking, let's get groups of people together to paint churches, clean parks, help the homeless, do time-bound projects, a half a day to clean up this public park, or paint the rec room of this church. We'll all come together, and our sponsor, Coca-Cola, will buy us pizza and Coke to thank us, and you'll meet some nice people, and you'll feel good about your afternoon. So they started gathering tens of thousands of email lists of young, more active, socially conscious people throughout Chicago. And this business was sputtering and really struggling and just about out of money, and they were downstairs, oddly enough, in the pizza shop on the ground floor of their tenement office space, when one of them said, gee, it's 1 o'clock on a Thursday, and we're like the only people in this whole pizza joint. Let's go ask Luigi, if maybe we could try one of our mailing lists, offer, come to Luigi's at 1 o'clock on Thursdays, buy one pizza, get one free, right? So they realized that they had no product market fit, but they had a product, organizing groups of people to do stuff. But they chose a more noble but less efficient stuff. You go, well, gee, do I really, it's going to be beautiful on Saturday. Do I really want to paint that church basement? I know I might meet a pretty girl or a good-looking guy, but maybe I'll go play baseball, right? And we all know with Groupon, the thing went to the moon. It has, on the other hand, sort of long ago declared victory. When your stock gets above 50, I think it was as high as 80 at one point, you sort of get pretty self-confident, and you stop talking to your customers, and you stop talking to your users. In their case, worst of all, they offended most of their payers. The payers were the restaurants or massage, spas, things like that were paying for the leads Groupon was delivering, and they weren't happy with the quality. The people that Groupon supposedly introduced as new customers came for the one great deal and never came back, and Groupon took a hefty portion of the discounted price in order to do the transaction. So today, you can buy a Groupon at Groupon to get 10 shares of Groupon stock for the price of one, because they declared victory and declared an end to the need for customer discovery. Which leads me to pillar number 3. If you can figure out who your customers are, and I've sort of alluded to this already, how do you get them scalably and repeatably at a continuously decreasing cost of acquisition? I would bet that almost everybody in this room can get his or her first few customers. You call in some favors, you call some former coworkers, you call your friends, your family. We know that unless you're making something really industrial, your mother and your wealthy uncle will be your first 2 customers, right? So you can get the first few, but that is not the beginning of repeatable, scalable, profitable. It gives you a momentary high when you come back with those first half a dozen orders, but you haven't proven to yourself that it's a business. In the 1999 Super Bowl, the height of the dot-com boom, 29 of the 33 advertisers on the Super Bowl were dot-com startups, right? 29 out of 33. $3 million for 30 seconds, with no certainty whatsoever that there was going to drive $3 million in business back to them. Of those 29, 2 have survived: GoDaddy and E-Trade. Okay? That's 29 people guessed that the key to their repeatable, scalable, profitable business was a 30-second $3 million bet. And a a lot of careers and a lot of investment dollars, were flushed down the toilet as a result of that. And so we talk at length. In fact, it was probably my favorite chapter in the entire customer development startup owner's manual. You can test this long before the product is done. You can test this the day you're going into business and figure out what's going to work for you and what isn't. And never think of that $3 million. By the way, it's $5 million now because they have a bigger audience and so forth. But you're going to take some gambles, but you're going to do it microscopically. And you should start this months, if not a year, before you're ready to launch. Are you coming up to tell me that I should shut up now? I will please wrap up. Yes, ma'am. Okay. If you don't tell me when to start, you don't get the right to tell me when to finish. So we got another hour to go. Okay, just what you wanted to hear. Anyway, you can begin this process almost immediately by creating a mini lab, right? Don't go start a $5,000 Google AdWords campaign. Start with $50. See what happens. Do they come to the website? Do they stay more than a page or two? Do they get to the buy page, and do they click? And if you spent $50 on AdWords, what did you get back in revenue? Do the same thing. Think of yourself as Dr. Frankenstein. In the basement, you have 20 cages. Each one's got a rat and a wheel. And in this one, you put email marketing, a little piece of cheese called email marketing. And in this one, you put social media cheese. And in this one, you put AdWords cheese. In this one, you put handing out flyers on street corners or chalk on sidewalks. In this one, you put PR or speeches at conferences. Each of those is testable long before you have a product. And so every couple of days, you'll go downstairs and you see which rats are dead. That program didn't work very well. And which ones are zooming around the wheel. Oh, let me give some more email cheese to that guy. That one's doing great. Test, measure, and optimize the way you should be testing, measuring, and optimizing everything in your startup. The product, the features, the channels, the pricing, the marketing. It's all about finding your way to product market fit and finding customers at a price you can afford. For most of you, in early stage startups, what you can afford is free. So start by testing all the free or virtually free things like social media, speeches, PR articles, email, website, and so on, search optimization. Because if those are working for you, congratulations. Your marketing budget just got better. But start to understand quickly what you are allowed to spend to get a customer, not to get a website visitor, unless your business is selling ads on your website. Allow yourself to overspend a little bit at first because you're going to get better at this as you go. It takes time, it takes practice, and if you are a hacker, you really want a hustler working on this. You want somebody who loves staring at spreadsheets, looking for anomalies, and basically you want to do everything you can to but to balance your use of a very expensive medium that functions in a lot of ways like drug addiction. Well, we're spending $5,000 a month on Google and business is okay. How much of that was wasted? Could you pare the waste out of it and get the same result for $2,000 or $3,000, right? You want to monitor the cost of every acquisition, cost per acquisition, and your measure of success is not what it is today, it's the line of you driving it down by getting better and better at this over time. A/B testing is a very simple tool you can use to do this. I'm going to skip this in deference to the lovely young lady so I think we kind of covered this. But again, are the tests repeatable? Right? If you just Facebook your friends, they're going to A, get tired of the message, and B, probably unfriend you very quickly. So what kind of friendly, informative, non-sales messages do they share with their friends? Are you expanding your network, pretty close? Don't forget, particularly in developing markets, simple, easy things like flyers or banners or information tables, things like that, speeches, demos, and so forth, right? Because you're going to need to do this forever. There is no sort of magical tipping point where all of a sudden your product sells itself. So, in summary, 3 pillars. Solve a nasty, ugly, painful, frequent problem. Figure out whether you have product market fit, whether you've found that match, or go back and try again, because you have to have it. And know how you're going to go about getting your customers before you're ready to launch. There's one more pillar in this magical startup equation. It's you, not me, not the book, not customer development, not lean startup, none of that. It's you, right? We and your mentors and your educators, we can teach you the tools. We can teach you this methodology. We can teach you how to build, or I can't teach you how to build too much, but good engineering professors can teach you how to build almost anything. It's all teachable. But we can't teach you the secret ingredient that the deputy president spoke about this morning. I hope you heard it. It was just a magnificent salute to entrepreneurship in the world, and particularly to its importance in the emerging economy here in Africa. We can't teach drive, persistence. I'm not giving up because this has got my name on it. So whatever your religion is, you need to believe in Jesus. But not the big one, in the history books and all of that. This one, the guy who started that dumpy little company, Jesus Martinez, Mexico City. Jesus was about 27 years old. He had a great job as a software developer, and he had a little business on the side making and delivering floral arrangements out of this tenement right down the street from his house. If that wasn't challenging enough, he had a new house, new mortgage, new baby, right, and relatively new wife. And he went home one night to his wife and said, I got this feeling, this business, with as little attention as I'm giving to it, is really starting to pick up. I know it's risky. I know we just had the baby. I know we just had the mortgage. We got a little money in the bank. And I believe I can really make this business great if I do nothing but it. If I quit my job with health insurance and a regular paycheck that comes out of a computer and devote my full time to this business. 5 years later, and Villa Flores delivers 8,000 bouquets a week all over Mexico. Not only that, not only is it a many million-dollar business, he asked me not to cite the number, he's spending time with his family, he's got work-life balance, he only works 80 hours a week. More important, he has started to vertically integrate. He owns all his own properties, all his own buildings. He owns all his own trucks. And a year ago, he now, in the most bold and clever move, he grows his own flowers. So his cost of that $50 bouquet went from $10 or $12 or $14 to the cost of the basket and the little crap they put on top of the dirt and the ribbon. By devoting himself, by acknowledging startups are not part-time. They demand, and if you're going to do it right, deserve all of your passion, all of your energy, drive, and every customer you can talk to. That's how you make your startup great, and I hope that's why you're all here. So thank you very much. What else do we got? And a beautiful woman from Africa in a lovely chiffon dress. She is about to introduce our next speaker, but I can't tell you who they are. So I'm going to tell you to stand up and stretch and get ready for what I'm sure will be another exciting presentation. Thank you.